All right, we are back with Rick Dunn, DXP Group and Linehaul Solutions. Rick, thank you for being
What
here,
up,
man.
Ryan? How are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's doing well. It's good to see you.
Yeah, man. Same. Last time was a bunch of fun. So I'm happy to be here again.
Yeah, so for our listeners who don't know who you are, this is actually the second time that we've had Rick on the podcast. He was our second guest to be interviewed on the Routing for Success podcast in episode number 2. And again, for those of you who haven't listened to that episode, just to give you the quick background story, after graduating from college, Rick worked for a time in the mortgage industry. He then left the mortgage business in 2008 once the recession hit. Considered going to law school for a time. He actually took the LSAT and got into a law school, but ultimately decided to become an air marshal instead, working for the government. He became a FedEx contractor in 2014, which he pursued while continuing to work full-time, traveling around the country as an air marshal. So almost as a side hustle or side business during that time. But Rick eventually left government service and went into trucking full-time with his business partner Darius, and has since expanded into doing trucking outside of FedEx, getting their own authority, and opening a consulting advisory business called Linehaul Solutions. And he has a show of his own called Around the Hub, where Rick discusses the linehaul business. So if you enjoy the Routing for Success podcast, I would definitely encourage you to also check out Rick's show Around the Hub. And also, if you haven't already listened to episode number 2 of this podcast to hear Rick's story of how he got started, go back and give it a listen. But, since releasing Rick's podcast episode, he's been one of the most requested guests to come back onto the show by listeners. So I wanted to bring him back onto the show specifically to talk about how linehaul FedEx businesses are bought and sold and what that process actually entails. This is a subject that Rick is qualified to speak on because his company, Linehaul Solutions, posts routes for sale on their website, linehaul.info. And something Rick does perhaps more than any other services company out there is to support the buyer of a business after the sale has already happened. And a big part of that support structure is making sure the buyer gets a fair deal to begin with and guiding them through the process. So I wanted to bring Rick on to tell us about what those steps are. What are the things that someone should be thinking about, if you're already in the business thinking about selling, or if you're considering getting into the business of FedEx contracting. So Rick, thanks for being here, man. Let's dive in.
That was fantastic. I'm going to clip that and play it like all the time whenever I need an intro. I got it now, man. Thank you. Put some music to it. It's on. What up, man? How's everything?
Things are good. Yeah, current events, I guess before we even get into everything that we just talked about, big announcement from FedEx last week, I think it was, that they are going to be merging a lot of their subsidiary companies. And the big one that affects particularly you and I and the listeners to this podcast is Ground and Express and what's happening there. And I won't spend too much time talking about it. There's a whole 30-minute episode that we just released last week on this topic. But basically, the short story is Ground in the contractor model is going to absorb Express in the corporate model. And FedEx is going to, it'll be a few years, but they're going to be winding down the Express corporate employee model and just giving all that package volume to Ground. So, I think that background to this conversation is even more important because, Rick, there's probably some people out there thinking right now, hey, FedEx is going all in on FedEx contractors. They're going all in, and it might be the place to be. Maybe I should get into this thing.
For sure. We just got, back from the Atlanta regional conference. Linehaul News put that on. It was an extremely, rewarding event for everybody who went. It was a ton of fun. Great food, good booze. And the vibe there was just, people are optimistic. And we went into this 2-year period of, this boom. You couldn't help but make money, 21 into 22. Governments printing, PPP money and loans and inflation's going crazy. But you know what? E-commerce was going crazy too. We all did a lot of extra miles. And it was a really good time. And then all of a sudden, brakes hit. And it's January, and where the hell is the volume? And oh my God, my dedicated run's not going to run. I got to sell, I'm going into bankruptcy. And we're climbing out of that that dark time, it was quick, and like most situations, incidents that we see in the line haul space, it was a small little outlier. And e-commerce, it's not going anywhere. And for any contractors who've been around, take a look at your market. Look at how many new hubs and stations have popped up. Why in the world are they continuing to build onto this hub and spoke system that runs extremely efficiently? Just ask, Amazon, how well FedEx in their ground model does. And we're looking forward to the future. There's a lot of tailwinds that are coming. UPS very well could be throwing us a gigantic bone very, very soon. And with the FedEx One, the contractor model makes money. We have better margins. So why in the world is FedEx going to put those packages on their own trucks with their own drivers and worry about unions and payroll taxes, and come to us? We'll carry that freight for you. You got a lot of contractors coming to this space that got money and have the ability to grow, and we would love to take that freight for them. So FedEx can be very tight-lipped at times with their plans and how it affects the individual business segments. But you talk to anybody who's significantly smarter than I am, which is almost everybody in this space. I go to the people who, just are on point with their knowledge and who they have access to. And everyone's looking forward to what this new announcement will bring. Important for me to get that out there, because every single conversation I have now is, oh man, what is this going to happen? What's going to happen here? And is this the end of the FedEx ground contractor model? No, we make too much money. We're too damn profitable.
Way too profitable. I mean, if you look at FedEx's financials, I mean, and it's all public record. They're a publicly traded company. Yep. So you can go to their website, go to the investor section. You can download the 10K, their annual report, the SEC filing for every single year. And you can clearly see how much money in revenue are they doing in ground versus how much money are they, revenue and operating income are they making for Express. And there's two things that stand out. One is that Express is hemorrhaging. I mean, they just do not make very much money at all. I mean, it's a really crappy business from a profitability standpoint, while ground has always been more profitable. And then the other thing that you'll notice is if you take the time just to look at the revenue, one of the things that I looked at is how much revenue total is FedEx Corporation bringing in, and then how much of that revenue is ground, made up by ground. And over the past 20 years, there is not a single year where ground made up less of that overall pie than they did the year before. FedEx has been consolidating more and more of their revenue into ground every single year consistently for 20 years straight. And this announcement last week is really just, the latest in this path, which really, if you've been in the industry for a while and if you've been paying attention, everyone kind of knows that this is the way that FedEx was eventually going to go. They have to
This
commit.
is the way.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to have two buildings, in one city. Why have an express building and a ground building? That's just wasted money, and they've been criticized
who's
for that.
Carry those packages for you at the best service for the best rate. And come on, FedEx is it's a Fortune 100 company. They make zillions of dollars, and those investors want a nice little return, right? It's like every other business. Your shareholders are going to dictate, and how do we make more money? Let's cut some cost. And this is a fantastic way to do it. And it's not like we haven't been talking about this for many, many years. So we do this and we get good contractors in, and we convince FedEx that they don't need to go to third parties. They don't need to sign these giant contracts, because we have contractors and a system that now can ramp up for their increased appetite for extra packages whenever that may be. And that's next. And that's what this podcast is about. I like to say that everything that I do, making podcasts and doing videos and trying to put myself out there, it really has one end goal. It's to convince FedEx that they don't need third-party freight. We've carried that third-party freight before. I know what they make, and I know what they pay. And I guarantee my FedEx business will do that for a lot cheaper, for a lower value. So everything is telling us that this is a great time to buy in. And if you're lucky, you're going to catch the bottom and pick up a business that wouldn't have been for sale, or pick it up for a couple bucks less than what you would have intended to had this been, 6 months, a year ago.
Yeah. So what are the effects of this announced merger of Ground Eating Express. And again, that's not happening overnight, but it already has been happening. They've been testing it out in some areas. That is the goal over the next few years. Well, one of the effects is, again, if you're thinking about getting into the business, this may be a good time to do it because
Mhm.
there's only going to be more volume going into the ground contractor model. That means more business opportunity for the model, and it may be a good time to get in. But also, if you're currently in it, if you're already a contractor, this may also mean that it's a good time to think about selling your business if that's something that you've wanted to do. Like 2022, particularly, the past like 9 months, not really a great time to sell the business because a lot of earnings, particularly on the pickup and delivery side, you could speak more to the line haul side, but earnings just went down because of fuel and other things happening. And it just wasn't a great time to sell your business because, and we'll get more into the details of this, but a big part of the valuation for a business is you look at the earnings, and then there's some multiple that you assign to that. And there's a lot of other things that go into it also. But if the earnings go down, the value of the business goes down. So, but one of the reasons this might be a good time to sell is because there might be a lot of people thinking about getting in. And when there's more demand, more people bidding for the businesses, more people inquiring and wanting to buy those route businesses or line haul businesses, the valuations go up. So I think that this is definitely a apropos conversation to talk about that.
It talking to a guy who, tries to make his living off of investing my time and my effort into new investors into the space, I can tell you, I don't have enough time in my day to have conversations with all of the potential buyers that are out there. I got to hire somebody. If you're interested in coming to work for Linehaul Solutions, find me because I need some really good help. Not to say that we don't have a fantastic team. There's just a lot of buyers that need lots of information and good education to be prepared to enter the space. I don't have enough sellers. Like, there's not enough people that want to sell good businesses at a reasonable price, in a price point where, buyers can take it over easily, or the business can't go SBA, or whatever the reason is. And so we've always seen it. We've always seen there's always been much more buyers than people who want to sell. But that number, from my day-to-day experience, and maybe I'm too damn close to it because I spend all day long on the phone, that gap is widening. I mean, I have 100 plus buyers that if I had a business for them, they would be ready to go immediately. And there's just people that don't want to sell, and that's good. Like, that's great. That's me as a FedEx owner. I'm watching my value in my business go up as a contractor. So, at the end of the day, we're all about the money, right? Let's not sugarcoat it. I want my value to go up, and so it's an exciting time. And we got through a couple of months, and it's not like we're back to where we were. And the unassigned runs are not running the way we expect them to. And FedEx is still looking at the freight that they're moving, and it's not as much volume as it is. But that's not to say that good things aren't coming. And I think this peak season is going to solve a lot of the issues that people are having with their businesses and their frustration with the business, because the volume is going to take off naturally because it's peak season. But there's some macroeconomic factors that we are hoping that's going to really push this market and get some aggressiveness in the way that e-commerce grows and the way that freight's shipped, on top of everything else that we've already spoken about.
Well, let's dive into it, Rick. So for someone thinking about selling their business, what are some factors that play into that decision as to whether or not they should stay in or whether or not they should sell the business and move on?
Everybody, that's an individual decision. Is the business making money? Are you turning a profit, and are you content with the money that you're making starting off? Now, if you are, then what's the reason to sell? Is it, you've been doing this for 20 years and you're burnt out, retirement, you want to just move on to the next best thing. You want to get into, another business model. Laundromat seems to be like the new favorite. I want to sell my FedEx business and get into laundromats. Awesome. Whatever it is. So look at the runs, and how attractive are those runs and that business going to be to a new buyer? Do you have 5 unassigned team runs that aren't running well right now. Maybe you want to wait a little bit and try to upgrade one of those runs or two of those runs, or get them running smoother and give me something that I can offer to a new buyer, because people know, like, hey, let me see your settlement statements. Everyone can look at it. I make videos on exactly how to analyze the settlement statement. So you want to have a business that's attractive to somebody coming in. And, unless you need to fire sell it, then you're not making much.
So what does that process look like? Let's say that someone has made the decision that they want to get out of the business. They want to sell, package up and sell their line haul contracting business with FedEx.
Mhm.
What do they do? What's the first step?
So I think the first thing traditionally that you've done is you go to, a broker, somebody who will take your business, analyze it, list it on Biz Buy Sell and BizQuest, and they'll sell your business. They'll take a percentage of that, and they'll find a buyer. And it can be a simple process, but once you determine what you're selling it for, you have that buyer, you got to go through this very extensive product process for the new contractor to become a contractor, in FedEx ground, get approved, go through the lim meeting. And I mean, that's obviously where we come in. We want to be a part of that with any of the new buyers coming on board. But it's typically, you're just going to go to a business broker who's going to do it for you. We all know, like, Root Consultants is always the elephant in the room. They're the biggest, the baddest. When they came on board, I think they really revolutionized the way that these businesses were sold, and did a fantastic job of marketing their ancillary services, what they can provide, education that Spencer and his team are bringing. And then there's other brokers as well. And can I be like, how honest do you want me to be on here?
Give it to us straight.
So there's some horrendous, slimy business brokers out there selling FedEx runs, and they lie about the numbers and the way they do their escrow. They take the deposit and you have to fight to get it back, and they're absolutely clueless when it comes to how to run these businesses. And then there's good ones that are knowledgeable and can provide a value to a seller. So what do? You make sure that the person that's selling your business has a damn clue in what FedEx line haul is.
So fundamentally, why work with a broker at all? A lot of these contractors, they're working out of one station or multiple stations, but many of them know the other line haul contractors who are working out of those exact same buildings, who would probably be interested in taking over those assigned and unassigned runs. Why work with a broker at all?
Don't work with a broker. It's a fantastic, very insightful question. I have never considered, but you're getting really good at this. Great job. I always think about, like, good question to ask. Like, I got to get that, that hard hitting question. I love the question. And why do you need a broker? I think I'm the perfect example. When I got a taste, when I knew that I had a business that people wanted to buy, and that I could take unassigned runs, upgrade them to assigned runs, get new free unassigned runs to replace them, package them together, and sell parts of the business off, I was hooked. I mean, it excites me. And to this day, that is what excites me about the FedEx business model. Love it. And continue to utilize that for myself and for people that we're working with. You're building something and you're adding value very quickly at times that people want to buy. And if you get lucky and you put in a growth opportunity for an assigned run and you get that, that's free. It's very in demand. If you're able to take that unassigned team run and upgrade it to that 6,000 mile dedicated team run because your SRS score is fantastic and your points on that run are good, I mean, that's exciting. Take it and you sell it. Now, where do you go to sell it? I talked to the brokers. This was 15, 16. This is prior to Spencer getting in the game. And the people that I spoke to didn't have a clue. There was nobody that had a clue. And I'll throw him a bone. Adam Armstrong in Atlanta. He was the one guy at the time that had any kind of sense of what these businesses were about, how to sell. He had some experience. Other than that, there was nobody. And I just chose to do it myself. So I took my own business and listed it on BizQuest. And that's a very time-consuming process. That can be challenging. finding a buyer, coming up with the numbers. You got to have some really good background and understanding what a buyer is looking for to do that successfully. And you talked to me those early days, I didn't know what I was doing, but stumbled through it, and I got good. I sold one business, sold another business, theirs, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is money we never thought we'd have before. We're rich, like let's and we blew it all, of course, because that's what you do. But that process taught me, how to do sales. I didn't have I did mortgages, but I never read a book on sales. I didn't know how to sell. And that taught me how to interact with buyers, how to put my presentation together. And if you're willing to put that time into it, it took me several sales to get comfortable before I was willing to do it for somebody else, before I, somebody. So your best bet is to find somebody in that market that say, hey, I want to sell you these runs. Now, understand that a contractor is always looking for a low ball deal. They want the fire sale, and they're gonna, expect a deal. But if you have somebody and you have a good run in certain markets and certain times, people are willing to pay whatever. In Woodbridge, even now, it's such an aggressive hub where the values just continue to go up. And if you have that 500-mile solo run to Shenandoah, down south, people are paying top dollar for that run, and they have a lot of money. There's a lot of cash in there. And you're not coming to me to sell that run for you. Sell it yourself. Just go to the yard and say, hey, I got this run for sale. Someone's going to buy it. Now, if you're in a market where we need to get some buyers in place, then you want to come to me or to somebody, list it for you, and take that buyer through the process. Because if I'm selling a business for you, I'm going to get a buyer through that entirety of the process much quicker than you can. I'm going to prep them, and I'm going to make sure that line haul manager is comfortable with that new buyer, or we're not going to send him there in the first place. So I think the value that not just me, that a broker can add, can certainly make the sale of your business go much smoother, and you could probably get more money for that sale depending on what the business is. And it's important to note that not all FedEx businesses and FedEx runs are created equal.
Yeah, and as you talk about that, Rick, one of the things it reminds me of is, and I hope you don't take offense to this comparison, but give me a chance to explain it first. It reminds me of working with a real estate agent to buy a house. Now, I bought my house a few years ago, and my realtor was okay, but I came out of that thinking, what value did they add to get 3% of my home sale, plus the realtor on the other side of that transaction got 3%, so 6% of the home sale. And my initial thought was, oh, that's a ton of money. I could have done this on my own. But then I really stopped to think about it. And, how many, for the seller of the home, how many potential buyers did that realtor have to talk with and show around the house and tell them about the house? And how many phone calls did they have to field that the seller was shielded from? They didn't have to deal with any of that. The realtor took care of it. And then there's also the aspect of, what are the steps? I have no idea. I have some idea now because I've been through the process once, but if you were to ask me, what are all the separate pieces of documentation you have to make sure that you're executing this thing correctly? I have no idea. I wouldn't even be able to tell you where to start. And so having a professional where that's what they do involved in the process, I feel like that is tremendously valuable. And it's something that people, a lot of people probably overlook.
Yes. And yes, the one thing you touched on was the paperwork process. That process, the turning a investor into a contractor, that process is riddled with bottlenecks. That can take 4 or 5 months to get done. And it can take, I think our record is like 13 days. We've got somebody in the system from negotiation period to tractor file numbers being done. 13 business days. And luckily, one smart decision I made was I have an operations manager named Kelsey, who's absolutely fantastic at that process. And she has a checklist, a more detailed checklist than anybody has ever had. And we're not taking a second to waste any time in letting FedEx slow us down and letting the managers slow us down. So we are handing them a packet of paperwork prior to the LIM meeting that lets them know, these guys are squared away. This buyer is going to be solid, And I know that I can trust that we are going to make this a very smooth process and I can just push them through, and as we continue to work with the same hub managers and they get that same packet of paper, they know that, it's coming, and they know that they're going to have a smooth process, and we expect speed. So if you want to get this business sold faster and you want that money in your hand faster, you're going to come to us. And not to mention the fact that if you do want to sell and you don't have a buyer built into that hub, I have, like I said, hundreds, maybe even thousands of potential buyers at this point who have been vetted, that we know, that understand that you can't get an SBA on every business and that you need to have cash and that there's expectations you have to have as a contractor, that we've spent lots of time with. And it's not just me. I mean, I'm sure Root Consultants potential list, makes mine, would embarrass me if I compared the two. So that's why you go to a broker, is that we get it done faster and speed. But can you do it yourself? Yes, definitely.
Okay, so let's look at this just very briefly from the perspective of a buyer. Why would a buyer want to work with a broker? And of course, I'll let you answer. But to me, it almost seems obvious. Like if you don't know any FedEx contractors, there is no place to start other than working with a company like yours. A broker who actually lists businesses in a clear, transparent, kind of itemized way. You can look and see where the businesses are, how much revenue they're bringing in, what their earnings are, maybe a little bit about what the fleet condition is, and then what the asking price is. And that's a good place to start. And then I'd like to turn back to the seller's perspective. But what else would our buyers thinking of when they're looking at getting into this business?
If you've seen my stuff, I've used this analogy, but it's so perfect that I can't not talk about it. Right? It's the real estate analogy. So you go, you're a seller. You want to sell your business. You go to a broker, and they list your business for you, and then a buyer comes along. Now, the problem that you had for many years prior to me entering this space was that selling broker also acted as a buyer's agent. And the problem is they had no damn idea of how FedEx linehaul works, and they weren't setting people up for success at all. That's changed to a certain extent, but it's still very prevalent out there. Now, I said early on, it's like, Darius, dude, like what? Like, this makes no damn sense. I go to buy a house. I need somebody representing me. I want somebody looking out for me, has my back, going to, just negotiate on my behalf. How can somebody negotiate? Oh, this is a fair price for this, but we can take a little bit of, no, you want somebody to say, F off, that price is too high. Go, take a hike, or no, I'm not paying a, 5x multiple for this unassigned team run that has no mileage being ran. And it's ridiculous. And unfortunately, with that aggressiveness and buyers competing for each run, like sometimes you can say, oh man, I missed out on that one, so I got to take this one. Right? I just want to get in. Well, it's not always best case. So, you call a buyer's agent up. Obviously, hopefully it's me, but if not, I'm sure there's other people that are coming along. I'm going to have competitors in the space. But it's funny when I take that analogy and it was John Haldy and I, we were talking about this and, what I was doing and kind of just putting myself out there. And Sim says, you know what? It's not just the buyer and the selling agent. Like, you have these brokers that are also the escrow agents, like they're taking a deposit and they're holding it, but it's not in a random independent lawyer's account. It's in their own account that they have. And so if there is an issue with that, who are you complaining to get your deposit back when the numbers don't match up? The person that's selling you the business, that's representing the buyer that wants to keep that money, because in large part, that's their commission built into that. And then even more so, in any real estate transaction, you have an appraiser, right? You have somebody, an independent third party that's appraising these businesses. Well, who's appraising the runs when the selling broker pulls that up and does probably a good job of representing it? But how do you know? So, I started out and it was just, look, let me represent you. Let me look at what you're buying. And to this day, if you're buying a business, I don't care if I'm making $1 off of it, just send it to me. Let me look at it and I'll tell you my thoughts. And I'm wrong. I can't think of any times, but I guess there's times I could be wrong. But let me look at it and I'll give you my advice. And I think part of being transparent and kind of taking on the persona that I do in this space is saying some things that, are probably a little heightened, a little aggressive sometimes, just to say, like, just don't take what I say because I'm saying it. Fact check the hell out of it. Like, there's plenty of really, really good CPAs and accountants and advisors and contractors that have been at this and much more successful than I've been. Fact check what everybody says and make sure what you're buying. Is it a great space to begin in? Hell yes. But not all businesses are created equal when it comes to line haul. This 3x deal that you're getting versus that 3x deal that you're getting, which is 3x of a multiple of the net, which is typically the valuation that people have talked about over the years. Those are two very different businesses. The way that they come up with those numbers, the way that those runs run, how much time you have to be involved in that business, you got to look at each business individually and take it on its own. Don't say, oh, this Woodbridge business was, it ran like this, so I'm going to buy this Atlanta business because, I'm getting a better deal on it because it runs the same. It's not the case.
So let's go back to the process. So, and everything you said there just made perfect sense. And again, going back to the real estate analogy, I'm happy that we're in sync on that because it's exactly what came to mind for me. So let's go back to the seller. So they've decided that they want to sell their business. They've considered whether or not they should just sell it on their own or if they should work with a broker to help them package up and list the business, give them some advice on what they think it's worth, and then do all the heavy lifting in terms of fielding all the phone calls and showing it and talking about it. They want to have a broker handle all that because they're still running the business themselves. Mm-hmm. So they've made that decision. They connect with a broker. And then what happens from there? What are the first pieces of information that broker is likely to ask the contractor who wants to sell their business? What types of questions are they going to have to answer? And what types of pieces of documentation and paperwork are they likely going to have to submit right up front?
It depends on who you're talking to. If I am selling your business for you, I don't want to see your tax returns. I don't care. They mean nothing to me. And I mean that very matter-of-factly. I don't give a shit. Can I say that on here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on, we can cut that. I don't give a crap about your tax returns because they don't tell me anything. There's no data in there that I want out of it at all. I want to see the A1, right? That is your contracted runs with FedEx on the TSPA Schedule A. Schedule A1 has them listed. That's the runs you're contracted to do. And then I want to back up what they do with settlement statement. I want as many settlement statements as I can get my hands on, but I'll take, 8 to 12 recent ones. Don't give me those peak season ones and say, this is what my business is doing. I'm sure it was doing that during peak season. Let's see what it's doing right now. I'd love a payroll journal, but I'm willing to take what you tell me you pay the drivers. And I want to see a good truck list with miles, and I'll determine the value on those trucks. That's it. That's all that I want to determine a value on your business. Now, if we determine, and let's get specific, right? Denver, Colorado, I got 3 dedicated team runs, 4 unassigned, AM runs and 2 unassigned, and I got 12 owned trucks that I'm going to sell. That's going to be a $2+ million business. Let's go SBA. Let's call, again, I'll throw him a bone, but I'm always calling Brett Hucka Ready Capital first. He tends to be like the go-to for SBA, and he's been in and around for a while, but I'm calling him up and I'm saying, hey, can this business go SBA? And what's he going to say? Well, give me the tax returns, because he sure as hell cares about those tax returns. So then I'm going back to the buyer and getting that information. And this is all part of that initial conversation. So what we want to do, how we're trying to finance and sell that business, may make it to where I don't care to value the business, and I'm not going to sell the business based on tax returns, but obviously the SBA is going to need that to determine if they can. So we're going to need that as well. That's it. There's nothing else that I'm going to need to come up with a value or start selling. I'll list that business based on that. And depending on who the buyer is and lots of people want lots of information. They just need, oh, I need to see more. Everything looks great, but can you give me a little more? They don't know what they want. They just want more. I've lost more buyers in that scenario because there was nothing else to give them than what I was showing. This is it. There's nothing more. And people watching this that have spoken to me probably get frustrated when I say, look, this is it. If I could data dump the hell out of you, and I could throw things at you, but it's not going to change whether or not you should or should not buy this business.
So settlement statements, payroll, truck information. Was that it?
A1,
Was there another one that you had mentioned?
A1.
A1. What is that?
The A1 is your schedule A1. It's part of the TSPA. It shows you exactly what a business owns. And it'll show the routes. Hey, truck 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 goes from point A to point B back to point A 7 days a week.
Got it. Now I've had other brokers tell me that something that they like to do is get full copies of like an entire year of bank statements. And the things that they're looking for is something. So you're shaking your head no, but one of the things they said they look for is, particularly with contractors who have been in it a long time, there's a lot of McDonald's runs. There's a lot of personal, not the drivers, but the owner, fuel. There's personal things on there that happen to get charged to the company credit card.
Right. Yeah. And Ryan, the only reason that you care about that is if you're selling the business based on the tax returns. So I could care less. So you need the add backs, right? If you're looking at the tax returns and you're trying to sell the business off the tax returns, the business is, every FedEx linehaul business is going to make like 5% of what the net income is, right? Because why? You're trying to get that number down and you're buying trucks and you're chasing depreciation. You're coming up with every last expense you possibly can. If you looked at mine, Darius's FedEx business, you're going to see some creative things on there, expenses that we take that are legal, but that you're not going to take on that business. It's just unique to us. So I want to present a business that is the closest example of what somebody is going to own and have. And I don't need to include things that the buyer does that's not relevant to them. We've bought in businesses where, or we sold businesses where like there were private planes involved to get the owners, from point A to point B. I'm like, God, probably not going to include that expense in there. I don't think you have access to a private plane, in that scenario. And maybe you do. And when we're running your numbers, if you want to include those costs in your business, let's do it because we want to take your tax burden into account. But that's not going to affect the price of the business. And we're not going to go to a seller and say, hey, I'm going to do this differently than you are. So I want the price to come down because I need a private plane for my business. Oh, I wish we could, but it's not going to happen.
So they connect with you, A1, settlement statements, payroll, truck information. Then what are you doing with that information once you have all of that gathered?
Okay. So I'll say that I have a very, I think, unique process. I've talked to many people about this, and I tell every one of my buyers, when I am going to provide a P&L for a business, hey, this is what I think this business is going to do. It's always the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end. It's not, this is what this business is going to do, so we should pay this multiple off of this net. It's the beginning of the conversation. Early on, I decided that I wanted to be able to compare businesses apples to apples. So there are things I didn't include and did include and kind of took data, extrapolated it in my own way that would be different than what other people do. And if you had other people on, they would say, dude, Rick Dunn doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Like, you can't do that. So good for them. This is just the way that I start the conversation, and I want to come up with an end net amount based on a very insightful conversation over multiple times with a buyer. And before we start negotiating on businesses, when I'm having that initial conversation with a buyer, I want them to understand how these numbers are relevant. It's the most important conversation. And the first thing I want to do is ensure that that buyer is very familiar with the FedEx space and educated on the runs and how they differ to be able to compare two different businesses. Nobody's looking at just one business, they're looking at two. And so the numbers that I enter into BizQuest, BizBuySell, my P&L, they can be very different than, like what Root Consultants is going to enter. And that can be very different than what like another broker decides to put, and that can be very different than what a traditional business broker, non-FedEx, sells. Like they're going to have a different way they come up with their numbers, and that's going to be different than your accountant, your CPA is going to come up with, which is going to be different than what your SBA lender is going to do. So it's different. So I want to see the A1, and I want to separate fact from fiction. And over the past 2 years, it's been a very exciting, like action-packed novel that was being written about FedEx linehaul. There's so much extra runs, so many extra miles, and that's linehaul. Like explosive growth is why you want to get into linehaul. So that's, for most of the time, it's very possible. But it was a bit extreme the last couple of years. So I got to take out, some of those numbers that I don't think we're going to be able to achieve anymore, especially in the local. A1, let's look at the revenue that the runs are going to do. And it's important to note that you look at that A1 and you'll see that solo AM run scheduled for 8 days out of the week, 7 days out of the week. And we can run the numbers based on 7 days, but then we have to look at the settlement statement. And we have to make sure that run is running 7 days. And if it's only running 5 days, we're only giving it 5 days. And that's very typical. You'll see a 7-day run on the A1. It's running 5 days. During peak season, it ramps up to a 6th and possibly a 7th day. So what numbers are we putting in there? I'm putting in 5 days, not 7 days, because we know it's not running for 7 days. So we take the revenue we generate off of the settlement statement, and we know what that business is going to bring in. Now we have to come up with our expenses, right? What's your biggest expense, Ryan?
My biggest expense, payroll.
Boom, payroll. We got to consider payroll. Yeah. Where am I getting those numbers from? Payroll journal, right? So if I didn't have a payroll journal, where can I get that number from? I'm okay asking a seller, like, hey, what do you pay your guys? 60 cents a mile, 65 cents a mile. Okay, I can do the payroll calculations, the taxes. I know what it's going to be. And then there's workers' comp. I can come up with a payroll amount. But there's workers' comp. So if I'm looking at history and payroll journals and tax returns, and I'm considering workers' comp, we got a big problem there. The amount I pay for workers' comp is going to be different than the amount a new person pays coming on board. Workers' comp goes down as you continue to run a successful business. So somebody new with a brand new business is going to have a higher workers' comp rate. So I can't take actual figures that have been, for the past however long on workers' comp, because it's not accurate. So what do? I probably call Dave or Joel up at CIA, just because, I know they're going to text me back immediately and say, hey, what do I include on this on my P&L? Oh, well, Mississippi is going to be 4 cents per dollar. And, New Jersey is going to be 17 cents. But, if we can use the previous person's data, we can get that down. So I want to that's a huge expense, workers' comp, especially in certain states. So that number we have to nail down.
Now, quick question for you on that, Rick. So I've heard other brokers advocate for basically never doing a stock purchase and instead doing an asset purchase. So, and just to clarify for our listeners who might not be totally clear on what the difference is between those two things, you've got a corporation. FedEx contractors typically run under an S corp. So they've got their corporation, Ryan's Trucking Company Incorporated. And I'm a FedEx contractor. I'm going to be selling my business. One way that I could sell the business is just to say, okay, I own 100% of the stock for Ryan's Trucking Company Incorporated, and I'm going to sell that stock to someone else. And then they will continue operating under the company Ryan's Trucking Incorporated. The other way that you can do it is to say, I am going to close Ryan's Trucking Company Incorporated, and instead, I'm going to sell you all of the trucks as assets. I'm going to sell you the rights to the contracts as assets, but you have Rick's Trucking Company Incorporated. And so you're buying all the assets, and there's trade-offs to each of those, which we could get into if you want to pick that apart, but I want to be mindful of our time. The reason I bring that up is, as I'm listening to this, one idea, if I had a FedEx business that I was selling and I was thinking about the workman's comp, or even more so, if I was thinking about getting into the business and you told me, hey, you're new at this, your workman's comp is going to be higher than what the seller's was. Well, I would say, well, why don't I just do a stock sale? If I take over their business, do I inherit that better workman's comp rate? Is that how it would
Yep.
work?
Yes.
Hmm.
So I can leave it at that. I can tell you all the reasons why you sure as hell don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Or we can leave it there. Up to you.
No, let's not leave it there. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So with that history that could be beneficial in terms of borrowing money or lower rates on stuff, you are inheriting all of that business's negatives and getting very few positives. So you're getting that SRS score, whatever they have, all of those negatives they have on it, the SRI that they've accumulated those points on, that's yours now. When you buy a new business, it starts fresh. You're at zero. You have nothing on there. Now that's good and bad, because when you're a new business, you have 0 miles, and miles is the dividend divisor quotient, whatever it is, the bottom number on the equation, is your mileage. So if you have more miles, you get a better score. And when you're brand new, you don't have the miles. So you're inheriting their SRS issues. You're also inheriting any issues that could have happened in the past. So 3 years, you sell me Ryan's Trucking, and 3 years from now, somebody shows up and they're like, yeah, you violated my rights because of when you did this. Now I'm stuck with that. You better believe they're coming after me. I own that business. My lawyer could have got you to sign something saying, it's not, I'm going to take ownership of this, but come on, in America and 2023, I'm getting sued. That's for sure. So you have to deal with that. If your percentages on your runs, if they're dipping low, close to 90, they don't reset. That's probably the biggest issue. Very few people are running at 100%. A lot of times we're selling businesses so we don't lose the runs, or we're selling runs so we don't lose those runs because our numbers are dropping. They don't reset when you do a stock sale. So the vast majority of these businesses are going to be an asset sale. And there's a couple that I know of that are on the stock sales. And, full disclosure, I'm in the process of a stock sale myself, and it's been a nightmare. But if it happens, I'm certainly going to share all those details with it, and certainly be willing to share why a stock sale happened as opposed to doing an asset transfer.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's some substantial trade-offs there, something to consider for sure for both the buyer and seller. Okay, so we've gone over the A1 settlement statements, payroll, truck information, whether to structure the sale as a stock or asset sale. And then we spoke a little bit about valuation. I have another question for you, Rick. One of the things you had mentioned is, if you were to give all of this information to a number of different brokers who specialize in FedEx,
yep,
you're going to receive a number of different valuation methods and probably a number of different valuations themselves. So
yep.
If I was a contractor looking to sell my business, is the advice that you would give me is to talk to multiple brokers and get multiple opinions on what you think the business is worth?
No, definitely not.
Why?
Just contact me. Just call me. I'm right. They're wrong.
Yeah, I'm talking to the man.
I think that you are seeing a community in linehaul. You're seeing people have access to one another. It started in Dallas last year. It's continued on. You have vendors and new people in the space, and you had Atlanta happen, and then you have Dallas coming again. And so I think that naturally a lot of our ideas and thoughts are going to be merging together, and you're going to get my goal in a lot of different aspects of what we do, but valuations of the runs, is to come up with something that linehaul supports. We do this. This is what we do. We do different than you, and we do it our way. But in our own little niche corner of the trucking industry, this is how we value a business. And when people are coming in or people want to sell, they can run the numbers themselves. They can decide what they're going to sell. Or there's a calculator, that comes into play on how that is. But do you talk, when it comes to selling, do you talk to, again, honest transparency? No, because most of the brokers don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to FedEx linehaul. Honesty. And I'm happy to talk names, and I'm happy to talk about conversations that I've had with people, because it's been a problem. Like, there's been these people that want to take a 12% cut on selling these businesses for hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. They don't have a damn clue of how this goes. And do I have a conflict of interest in saying that? Yes. Yeah. So much so that I started a business, that would assist buyers so that they didn't get taken for a ride and they showed up on day one ready to go. But there's some good players. I say names of people that I like, that know what the hell's going on. For all the press that Root Consultants and Spencer Patton has gotten over the last year, they run a tight ship, and he's got some impressive ass people that work for him, and they do it well, and they do their thing, but their numbers are solid. And even if their valuations are high, or they'll always justify them, and they'll give you all the information, which I can appreciate, because that's a unique thing. And that's been a very unique thing in this space. And I think FedEx linehaul contractors and new buyers aren't going to let certain people operate in this space anymore just because they don't provide value. It's going to be, capitalism, best product's going to win out.
I want to be mindful of our time, Rick. So we've talked about everything that you need to collect.
Brian, can I briefly just finish my valuation method? Just so.
Yeah. And I edit after the fact. So yeah, that's good. So what I can do is piece this back into what you were talking about before.
So you take, we talked about payroll, right? The next thing is fuel, right? And fuel is a huge topic. Now you have, people, John Haldy, even Becky at Linehaul Central. There's some people who remove fuel out of the equation completely, and I'm very okay with that. If we just ignore the fuel, for a seller, you're going to kind of lowball the value of their business or their net, because most of us are making a profit on the fuel surcharge. If you leave the fuel surcharge off because you're leaving the fuel expense off, especially if businesses that run heavy spots, you're not going to take into account some profitability. So I don't do that, but I do recognize fuel can be problematic. Let me ask you this. If you're selling your business, how would you include fuel in it?
How would I include fuel in it? Okay. Well, I mean, the very first answer that comes to mind is I would look at what I spent for the past 6 months, past year, and then try to extrapolate that.
Perfect. Now, if we look at 2022, we have a year full of volatile peaks and valleys when it comes to fuel. If you leave out certain times of the year, you're gonna run into some problems if you're trying to be honest with that number, trying to predict the future, forecast what it's going to be. So we do use it and we say it, but I don't love that number. It's very easy to take some settlement statements, dump them into Haldy Tech, Ground Force, and come up with what this business spent on fuel over a period of time. Now, if I am an unscrupulous seller and I wanted to game the system, it'd be very easy for me to lower my fuel costs, because I just wouldn't run certain transactions through the system, through the FedEx system. I'd have my driver pay cash. Hey, use this credit card for this run. And do people do it? I don't think so. Could I do it? Yes. And if there's the opportunity for dishonesty, I think there's going to be players in any market that's going to take advantage of it. Oh yeah, this truck, this 2007 Cascadia that happens to have FCAM on it, gets 7.5 miles per gallon. Yeah, look at it. Look at the numbers. It does. No, it doesn't. So when it comes to fuel, I very, very controversially use a number, a percentage, a ratio that I deem to be appropriate for that truck on that run in that market. And the number is going to be anywhere from 24 to 33%. But it's the only way that I've comfortably come up with. And a lot of times the numbers that we're using off the revenue are dependent on the fuel surcharge that's being applied at the time. So I'm changing that number based on my revenue. And we have a little formula matrix that we've come up with that it works pretty well. And it's pretty accurate when you compare it to any of the other softwares that are coming up with, margins on fuel, ratios on fuel. But it's a number that I'm coming up with, and I try to shoot high, 1 or 2%. But fuel, I think is a topic we need to continue to talk about in terms of how we value these businesses, because there's ways to game it. And depending on the trucks, if you're selling your business because you decided to go buy, expensive leased trucks and it doesn't make sense, and we're selling your business, but we're not going to include the trucks in that. So a new buyer has to come up with their own trucks, which happens a lot in my businesses. I rarely include trucks in my sales. I want good trucks. I want the right trucks on the right runs. Well, the 22 Max that you're running are going to get different fuel efficiency than the 18 international day cab that we're putting on this run, because that's the run that makes sense for it. So why am I going to use your numbers? They're not accurate to me. How do I come up with my numbers? Got to use a fuel ratio. There's fuel, and then there's the trucks, right? The truck expense, it's very easy to come up with. It's what it is right now. If you're taking over the truck, if you're financing trucks, obviously you're going to AP Financial. They're the best. And we're going to use, actual data that we know, because everybody uses you guys. So I have lots of data to pull from. I know what the rate's going to be. I know what the term's going to be on multiple different trucks. So it's easy to come up with. Then we're adding in a couple of little excess type stuff, def fuel. If the business is going to run, no, we're not even including a manager in that, because I want apples to apples. Not all businesses need a manager. Not all businesses need extras. And I want to come up with that value. What did I determine that net to be? So now I have a system that whatever business we're comparing it to, we have an apples to apples type comparison for that business, and doesn't include other numbers. Now, the important thing to note is I am taking that number, assuming a driver runs every day out of the year, no breakdowns, no sick days, no weather delays. I want that number based on a perfect year. Is that accurate? No. My numbers, I tell people, the first thing I say is there's nothing about my numbers that are accurate to you. This is just the beginning of a conversation. I'm including things in there that in a perfect scenario that we know won't be there. But I'm not including things in there that we know we're going to do. Those slip seating, those trucks, the extra spots that you're going to get during peak season, running extra trucks, all the peak bonus money that you're going to get, the extra truck that you're going to run. I'm not including any of those numbers in there. And I'd say 95% of the time, I'm lowballing the net, because I think that it's the only way to really value a business. And yes, I know there's people that will sell a run that's done the same thing for the last 3 years, and you can look at settlement statements and it runs perfectly, but it was never put on the schedule. Why was it never put on the schedule? Why do I not see this on the A1 if it's been running consistently for 3 years? What is it? Like, I'll have the conversation. Oh, this market doesn't add it, whatever it is. I'm not including it on my valuation. That turns sellers off to me. People won't come to me over that reason, and I'm okay with it, but I'm not using that. We come up with a net, and we come up with something that we think makes a lot of sense, and we determine a multiple on that. And not all multiples, like there's really great runs. Like there's runs I call white whales, which are AM dedicated runs, solos, doing over 550 miles a day. And they run 6 days a week, not 5, not 7. They consistently run six days, and during peak, they'll probably ramp up to 7 days. That's my highest multiple I'm giving. I'll give those a 4.5 times X all day long. So if you see one of those businesses for sale, you should pay 4.5 times X. I know you can get a 2.5, 3.5 times X off of another business, but so what? Take the perfect run that everybody's been chasing and take an extra year to pay it off, and have that run build an entire business around the infrastructure that run's going to create for you. And so the multiples, it's not always 3, it's not always 4. It's whatever we determine the ease of ownership to be for that business, and the demand that I know that business is going to have. And at the end, we come up with a value, and I think it's pretty fair for both sides. And that's what we're looking for. Fair. I want a really, really attractive price for a really good business. And I want a buyer who's willing to pay for that business, that good business.
Yeah, Rick, what's really jumping out to me, particularly for the people listening to this episode who are considering getting into the business, there's probably a lot of phrasing and verbiage that you're using that is just going over people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people listening to this are contractors, so they'll understand what you're talking about. But the white whale run is the AM assigned solo 500 miles a day plus 6 days a week,
550.
not 5, not 7. And when you talk about that, I think really that just illustrates the importance of working with someone who knows what they're doing, working with someone who is an expert and can tell you, hey, is a 4.5x multiple, is that too much to pay for a business? Well, that depends. It depends on the nuance of what that particular run is, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I'm happy that you spoke about that.
For sure.
So you value the business. You collect everything. You talk to the seller. You value the business, and then I want to wrap this up, Rick, by once a buyer is located and you've talked to them about the business, you've gone through some due diligence with them, and they say yes, let's go. I want to do this. What happens? How does money get transacted, and
Ooh,
what are the next steps from there?
It's time to get to work, and my team's getting involved, and we want to move you comfortably but quickly. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to the seller, and we are getting an LOI signed. With that LOI comes a deposit. I like that deposit to be left in a third-party escrow account, and typically it's probably going to be the buyer's attorney that is holding on to that escrow. I don't want to hold it myself. I won't hold it. There's cases where you use a seller's attorney, and if there's neither of them kind of have something they're comfortable with, obviously we have people that'll be involved, but they're going to want to look over the LOI and the purchase agreement as part of it. It's going to add a couple days into the mix, but we want that deposit to go somewhere. On smaller deals, I am okay in scenarios where the seller holds on to the deposit as part of it. And sometimes maybe we won't even have the deposit, but whatever we determine that to be, each individual sale is going to be, unique in its own right. LOI, and with the LOI, I want the BD30 is what transfers the run. We're telling FedEx, hey, we're transferring this business from Ryan's trucking to Rick's trucking, and that's what they need. They want the BD30, and I want a really good RFI that we're going to write with you during the process, and I want a safety plan as well. I'm okay giving that to the manager, but I'd love to include what we call the prelim docs. You have a lim meeting, your line haul information meeting, which is where you sit down with the manager and the BDS. So prelim documents are what they would like to have ahead of time. And we found that if they do have that, this process goes much smoother. So it's all your documentation, your corporation, your articles of incorporation. It's a W-9. It's your E-Verify form. And it is any state-specific docs for operating in that state that you'll need. So I love it when the corporation has already been formed. We have that information. Hey, do a W-9, get your E-Verify, we'll help them through that. And to hand that entire packet in a PDF with the sale notice to FedEx. And typically the seller is going to do that. They'll email it in, CC the buyer on it, and that starts the process off. Now we're immediately we start the education process. We have our boot camp that we're providing it's basically a handbook that we wanted to create for how to be a great contractor, especially the how to do stuff, the day-to-day type stuff. And we're getting them ready for the LIM meeting. So prepping for the LIM meeting, making sure that you're going to represent yourself and your business in a positive light, knowing the questions to ask. We need to verify anything about the business with the manager. We want those questions prepared for, but want them prepped so that hopefully that LIM meeting happens in a couple of days from that initial submission.
And then after the LIM meeting, what happens from there?
We start buying stuff. First, we figure out the trucks. Where are we getting trucks from? If they need to finance the trucks, we're referring to them to AP. If we want to go REL, is a great opportunity. So, get them that information. Who are they using for their safety equipment? Are we going to use what the buyer already is using? A quick note there, up until January of 2023, when you turned in a tractor file, nobody was looking to make sure your lane departure was included in the process. And so you have a lot of trucks out there right now running without lane departure because they have a software, one of the VEDR systems, the vehicle event data recorder, the cameras that aren't capable of providing the lane departure. Like Lytx is, unfortunately, Ground Cloud isn't. I know that it's coming, and for the record, Ground Cloud's immensely better. I use Ground Cloud because all of my trucks have the lane departure equipped with from the factory. Now, if you don't have that, then you have to go to a third-party lane departure system, which is extra costs for what? So you might have to change your VEDR system in order to make that deal work, because now they're looking at the build sheets, and if they see the build sheet doesn't include the lane departure, and you're using Ground Cloud or Motive or one of the other ones that they know that it's on lane departure, you're going to get called out for that process. You're just going to have to go by Lytx, and that's going to take forever.
Hasn't lane departure been required for years on the line haul side at this point?
Yes, Ryan, it has been required for years. Now, did we run trucks that didn't have lane departure? Because there's certain things that like make a big deal. I'm not a truck driver. I'm not even gonna touch that one. I'll get killed for that one.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, everyone needs to have lane departure. It's a very valuable system to integrate into a well-oiled machine that you're trying to create your FedEx business to be.
Rick, last thing I'd like to talk about, just thinking about chronologically the process of transferring one of these businesses from one person to another. So you go through the whole process and then you start buying things. You talked about the assets themselves, financing, the systems. And then, probably the last piece would be the support after the sale. And this is one of the things, and just to take a step back for a moment, this podcast is about interviewing FedEx contractors, which you are. You are a current FedEx contractor, which honestly is the reason why, I'm willing to have a conversation like this one. There are a lot of other third-party companies which have reached out to me saying, hey, I provide X, Y, and Z service to FedEx contractors. Can I come onto the podcast? We have a pretty good audience at this point. And many of those people I've said, maybe at some point in the future, but really, I want to stick to the bread and butter of what this podcast is supposed to be, which is interviewing FedEx contractors, which you are. And I feel like that is a good thing. If I was someone who wanted to get into the business and I really had no background in trucking and I didn't know all of the intricacies of FedEx, because FedEx is not going to train you. They're going to expect that as soon as you are the contractor, you'd better know how to show up day one and get on it and perform. And they're not going to tell you what to do, but they will penalize you if you don't know what you're doing. So having someone who's in the business themselves, I feel like is a really good thing. So Rick, tell us a little bit about the support system after the sale closes that you typically offer to people.
I appreciate you having me on. A lot of fun. Like, this is great. And I'm a contractor and I'm going to continue to be a contractor, and I'm buying more runs. And as I can, make more money, probably going to invest in even more runs. Now, the most important thing when it comes to a new buyer coming in is be educated. Be prepared to run that business from day one. Now, if you're using us, don't you worry. That's a definite. Now, and if you're not using us, if you're buying it directly from the seller, make sure that seller, you are running that business with them. When you start that tractor file process, if you're not comfortable with running payroll, and if you're not comfortable with interacting with the drivers and the terminal, then you probably need to get that, really quickly. If you don't know how to look at the VEDR cameras to analyze safety and make sure that you're not failing your KIs, it's a huge deal. Now, for the people coming in, every buyer, it's very similar. It's, hey, I have a good chunk of money. I want to buy a business, make great returns on that money, but I kind of don't want to be that involved in the business. I want a passive turnkey business. Now, you can argue what is and what isn't. A lot of it has to do with that business, but there are many vendors that have popped up that will make this space immensely more rewarding for you for not a lot of money. Around the hub, Christian and I, what we done is try to showcase a lot of those, because our focal point is really not to contractors, although, they're welcome. I think they're getting a lot of information on it, but I want to show new contractors how to run their businesses very effectively from the beginning and easily. Ease of ownership. I'm lazy. I'm lazy as hell. Like I want to run my business. I want somebody else to run my business for me, and I want to collect the check. And I'll get involved when I need to, and I want everyone to be able to do that too. So we are, in Atlanta, we interviewed all of the vendors that were at the show. And so we put stuff out there. I've had Emily on before. I'd love to talk to you about AP. And I say AP because you guys are the best when it comes to new buyer financing, right? If you want to buy a truck in your brand new business, I don't know where you think you're going to go if it's not AP, but it's not like people are just begging to lend new trucking companies money right now. You guys have had a niche in the linehaul market, and it's very much appreciated. Recruiting is the most important aspect of running a FedEx linehaul business. The most. Recruiting is most important by far. Second used to be the truck, now it's safety, but recruiting is way beyond that. If you're successful at recruiting, you're going to be a successful contractor. And if you're not successful at recruiting, you damn well better make sure you find somebody who is. And there are phenomenal people in this space that are going to find you great drivers at a very reasonable price. Pay them for sure. And so I think what we're seeing now, really for the past year or two, are people that are just providing so much service to this space and creating products and coming up with technology that just makes this such a more rewarding place to be in. More money, less expenses. What can go wrong? The REL fuel card is revolutionary in what Pat and Tyler were able to put out. Like, you want to lower your expenses, you damn well better make sure you're using the REL fuel card, especially with those teams that are running all over the country. You make sure, the first thing I do when I look at my settlement statement is I scroll down to the bottom. I don't even care how much I made. I care where my drivers fueled up. It's that important, that much of a game changer. And that's something new. They were able to come on and lower everybody's fuel expenses significantly. What's next? What's next? Who's going to provide that next thing that just makes this a more profitable place to be in? Combining the purchasing power of all of the thousands of contractors that we have, putting our purchasing power together and telling vendors, say, hey, you want to operate here, you want to utilize what we have, then you need to cut us a good deal on trucks, on whatever it is that's next. So I'm looking forward to the growth in this space. I'm here, and Linehaul Solutions, as well as you, Ryan, and your podcast, I think is going to continue to do an amazing job, right? Because we're the ones doing it, bringing all of the new opportunities and the really in-depth analysis from contractors, which I'll say what you do is fantastic from the perspective of that's what a new contractor needs. I need my people, my guys that want to buy a FedEx business, to listen to your podcast and meet those contractors and share those best practices, because for the first time ever, we have a sense of unity in the linehaul space that did not exist years ago. You had that guy next to you that you were cool with. You had his number. Hey, any drivers that are free? What do I do here? But now you have this unity ever since the Dallas Summit that we can do this together. We're all in this together. We are a team, and we need those contractors that haven't made their way to one of the events or made it to, a Facebook page or any of the stuff that allows you to connect with everybody. We need more everybody coming together and uniting, not to violate the TSPA in any way, but to group our purchasing power together.
Well, I think that's a good place to sign off, Rick. Is there anything else before we finish this that you want to talk about?
We do Around the Hub Tuesdays at 9:00. Took a little hiatus because that was a lot of work, as you know, to put those together. But we are looking forward, and we have some really, really valuable, exciting shows that are coming up, talking to contractors, drivers, vendors that are going to really shed a light on certain topics that I think need to be spoken about. There's nothing taboo. I'll talk about anything. And Sometimes I can be too honest, whatever, but there's some things coming up very soon. So not what's today's Tuesday?
Today's
Today's
Thursday.
Thursday. That's my life right now, people. So next Tuesday, we're doing our Atlanta recap. We're going to showcase a lot of great vendors that I had never knew existed there. And from then on, there's going to be some shows that we'll be advertising for. That it's going to be exciting.
Thanks for coming on, Rick. Appreciate
Thanks
you.
for having me, man. Great time as always. Love what you do. Love the shows, and love AP Finance. That's for sure.
Well, you take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome, man. Thank you.